The wind outside the Blackwood Institute did not just howl, it screamed with the voice of 1,000 forgotten souls. Elias, a former researcher who had traded his academic career for the quiet isolation of the Maine coast, sat huddled in his basement. He was surrounded by a graveyard of technology, humming vacuum tubes, rusted oscilloscopes, and tangled webs of copper wiring that looked like metallic ivy. Elias wasn't a gardener of plants, but of signals. He was looking for the static between worlds, a theoretical frequency that his late mentor, Dr. Aris Thorne, believed could bridge the gap between our reality and whatever lay beyond the event horizon of human perception. For 3 years, Elias had heard nothing but the chaotic hiss of the universe. But tonight, on the anniversary of the 1954 disappearance of the USS Cyclops, a mystery that had haunted his family for generations, the equipment began to behave strangely. At exactly 3 a.m., the needles on his analog meters didn't just flicker, they slammed against the pins. A low-frequency hum began to vibrate through the floorboards, a sound so deep it felt like it was originating from his own marrow. Elias reached for the brass dial of his custom-built receiver. His fingers, calloused from years of soldering, trembled as he tuned the frequency to 14.28 hertz. This was the infrasound zone, the threshold where sound becomes a physical force rather than an auditory experience. Suddenly, the static died. In its place was a silence so absolute, it felt like a physical weight. Then a rhythmic clicking began. Click, clack, click. It was the sound of a telegraph, a technology that should have been dead for a century. Elias grabbed a notepad, his heart hammering against his ribs. He began to transcribe the Morse code. WHEREISTHELIGHT. Elias stopped. His breath hitched. "Where is the light?" he whispered to the empty room. The radio didn't hiss back. Instead, a voice emerged from the speakers. It was thin, metallic, and sounded as if it were being filtered through miles of freezing seawater. It wasn't just any voice. It was his father's, a man who had been declared lost at sea 25 years ago. "Elias, the door in the basement isn't a door, it's a lens." Elias stood up so quickly his chair clattered to the floor. The basement had no doors other than the one leading upstairs, but as he turned around, he saw it. In the far corner, behind a stack of old textbooks on quantum entanglement, a faint, shimmering outline had appeared on the brick wall. It looked like heat haze on a summer road, a distortion of space-time that shouldn't exist in a cold Maine cellar. He approached the distortion, his iron flashlight cutting through the thick dust. As he got closer, the smell hit him. Not the damp earth of a basement, but the sharp, biting scent of ozone and rotting kelp. The air around the shimmering patch felt electrified, making the hair on his arms stand up. "Don't look into the center, Elias," his father's voice warned, now coming from the walls themselves. "If you look into the center looks into you." Ignoring the warning, Elias leaned in. Through the shimmering veil, he didn't see a room. He saw a vast, dark ocean under a sky filled with stars that were the wrong colors, pulsing violets and sickly greens. Floating in the water was the rusted hull of a ship, the Cyclops, its lights flickering with a ghostly blue fire. On the deck, figures stood perfectly still, their faces turned toward the sky. They weren't moving. They were trapped in a frozen moment of time, a quantum loop that had no beginning and no end. Elias realized with a jolt of pure terror that one of the figures was waving at him. It was his younger self, dressed in the yellow raincoat he had lost as a child. Suddenly, the basement lights flickered and died. The only light came from the shimmering portal. The clicking of the telegraph grew faster, louder, until it sounded like a machine gun. The walls of the basement began to stretch, the bricks turning into a dark, viscous liquid that dripped upward toward the ceiling. "What do you want?" Elias screamed into the void. The answer didn't come in words. It came in a surge of energy that knocked him backward. The radio exploded in a shower of sparks, and the vacuum tubes shattered like glass grenades. In the sudden darkness, Elias felt a cold, wet hand wrap around his ankle. He kicked out, scrambling toward the stairs, but his legs felt like they were moving through molasses. The gravity in the room had shifted. He was being pulled toward the shimmering wall, toward that dark ocean where his father and his past were waiting. He grabbed the edge of his workbench, his fingernails digging into the wood. He could see his skin beginning to glow with that same ghostly blue fire he had seen on the ship. He was becoming a signal. He was being digitized, broken down into bits of data to be transmitted into the void. With one final, desperate effort, Elias reached for his heavy soldering iron, which was still plugged into a separate battery backup. He didn't use it as a tool. He used it as a weapon, stabbing it into the heart of the main transformer. A blinding flash of white light consumed the room. For a second, Elias felt himself being torn apart and put back together 1,000 times. He saw the birth of stars and the death of galaxies. He saw every version of his life that he could have lived. Then, silence. When Elias opened his eyes, the sun was rising. The basement was a wreck. His equipment was melted, the bricks were charred, and the shimmering portal was gone. He was shivering, covered in a fine layer of salt and sand. He slowly stood up, his bones aching. He reached into his pocket and felt something cold. He pulled it out. It was a small, rusted brass button, the kind worn on naval uniforms in the 1950s. Elias looked at the radio. It was dead, but as he turned to leave, a faint sound came from the broken speakers. It wasn't a voice and it wasn't static. It was the sound of a soft, satisfied laugh, followed by the rhythmic clicking of a telegraph. THANKYOUFOROPENING, Elias didn't look back. He walked up the stairs, locked the basement door, and threw the key into the Atlantic Ocean. But late at night, when the wind is just right, he can still hear the clicking coming from the walls of his house. And he knows that somewhere, in the space between 14.27 and 14.29 hertz, something is still waiting for him to tune back in.